Wait. This is how it happens. This is why Casey wears my ring. Casey is...
He's my child.
Oh, it's okay. Is he breathing? I didn't see him breathing. He's gonna be okay. He has to be. Come on.
4 seasons, 3 founding families, 1 pawn that has spent every single one of those seasons quietly rewriting everything we thought we understood about Port Haven. And on Sunday night, The Way Home aired its series finale, ahead by a century, a 90-minute extended episode that genuinely tried to give every single storyline this show has ever planted some kind of landing. I have been sitting with this finale for a while now, trying to figure out where to even start. So let's just go through it properly. Piece by piece, because I honestly think every single thread here mattered enough to deserve that. The episode picks up in the immediate aftermath of the explosion, exactly where the penultimate episode left us. Elliot has been shot, the tunnels beneath Lingermore have collapsed into chaos, fire and smoke, and screaming partygoers above ground who have no idea what just happened beneath their feet. And Kat is dragging him, bleeding, toward the one thing in either century that has ever been capable of saving the people in this family. The pond. What happens next is one of the most frantic, layered sequences this show has ever attempted. Alice and Jacob, who had been in completely different places when the explosion went off, both end up converging with Kat in 1926, and together the 3 of them manage to get Elliot through and back to the farm in the present. The second they arrive, Sam doesn't hesitate. He tells Del to call 911 immediately. No time travel logic, no hesitation about how to explain a gunshot wound to paramedics. Just instinct. And Elliot survives. After 4 seasons of searching for a mother who didn't want to be found, after building an entire secret identity in the 1920s just to be close to her, after taking a bullet meant for the woman he loves, he survives. I honestly think the show earned every second of relief in that moment because it never once let us feel safe getting there. There's a smaller, quieter piece of this rescue that I don't think enough people are talking about. Before that convergence happens, Jacob jumps into the pond on his own, hoping to find Kat and bring her home. Instead, the pond sends him somewhere else entirely, to what's described as Elijah's last day. We don't know much about who Elijah is beyond this scene. Presumably some earlier Landry ancestor we've never been introduced to directly, but Elijah tells Jacob something that I think quietly reframes Jacob's entire arc this season, that the Landry farm still exists because of him, not despite everything he ran from, because of it. After a season spent watching Jacob wrestle with guilt, with Thomas's voice in his head calling him a coward, with the shame of staying away as long as he did, the show gives him this one strange, almost mystical detour to tell him directly that his presence matters to this family's entire continued existence. I honestly think that's one of the most generous things this show has ever done for a character. And then there's Cliff. Cliff does not make it out of the Goodwin estate. He dies in the explosion, and it is genuinely one of the hardest things this finale asks you to sit with, because it doesn't just end his story. It leaves Fern pregnant and completely alone in 1926, with no idea how she's supposed to raise a child by herself in that world. I have to talk about Bianca Melchior's performance here specifically, because critics covering this finale have called it flooring. And having watched it, I don't think that word is doing too much work at all. You feel every single ounce of that grief land on her. And then the show does something that I think is the quiet, emotional masterstroke of the entire series. It reveals that this baby, Fern and Cliff's child, grows up to become Kat's grandfather, which means this devastating, lonely, frightened moment in 1926, this woman standing in the wreckage of the worst night of her life, is actually the origin point of the entire family we have spent 4 seasons falling in love with. Every kitchen party, every pond jump, every Landry we've ever met traces back to Fern surviving that night alone. I honestly don't think I'll be able to watch any earlier episode of this show the same way again now that I know that. Now, the mystery that the entire season was quietly built around. Tessa. The question that drove Elliot into 1925 in the first place, that built his whole secret identity as Tom Buchanan, that turned into a cipher revealing 5 souls in, 4 out. Tessa, gone, NY job botched. Did she actually die in that explosion or didn't she? And the finale's answer reframes essentially everything we thought we understood about her. Tessa didn't die. She and her allies staged the entire thing, the disappearance, the unidentified 5th body, all of it, as a calculated way to escape the bootlegging operation and the very real danger of being tangled up in Capone's world, while also protecting Port Haven's future at the same time. I think the show put its own thesis best when it basically told us, through how this unfolds, that this was never a mystery about who died in that explosion. It was always a mystery about who survived it and what they were willing to give up to do so. Once you sit with that, it completely recontextualizes Rita's casual historical aside back in episode 9 about only 4 bodies ever being identified after the explosion. That 5th, unidentified person was never a victim lost history. She was someone who chose, deliberately and at great cost, to disappear on her own terms rather than die on someone else's. And in 1979, in a storyline running in parallel, Alice gets one more visit with a young Tessa, a woman who is clearly struggling under the crushing weight of motherhood years before any of this history catches up with her. I think that scene exists specifically so that we're not allowed to only understand Tessa as the legend the 1920s built around her. We have to sit with her as a tired, overwhelmed young mother first. It's a small scene, but I honestly think it's doing some of the most important emotional labor in the entire episode. There's also a smaller mystery that finally gets put to bed here, even though most of the actual explanation arrived in the previous episode. Danny was the one writing those anonymous, unsettling letters all season, not out of cruelty, and not out of any real desire to hurt the Landrys. Out of years of quietly carrying the blame for Jacob's disappearance, while the truth about where Jacob actually was sat hidden from the town the entire time. It's one of the more grounded, human-scale revelations in a finale otherwise dealing in time machines and staged deaths and gangster cover-ups, and I think it works precisely because of that contrast. Sometimes the wound that hurts the most isn't the time travel paradox. It's just an ordinary grief nobody ever let him name out loud. Now, let's talk about the wedding, because I genuinely think this is where the finale does its cleverest piece of long game storytelling. Go all the way back to the very start of this season, to that flash forward cold open at the pond. Dell, Kat, and Alice standing together. Kat saying she wishes he could be here for this. Dell telling her he's here in spirit. Someone mentioning it's almost time for the I doze. Every single fan, myself included, spent the entire season assuming that was building toward Kat and Elliot's wedding. It wasn't. It's Jacob and Abby's. And the way the show gets there is genuinely satisfying rather than feeling like a swerve for the sake of one. Alice tells Jacob she's officially heading to New York in January, which lines up perfectly with her decision to defer earlier in the season since deferring never meant giving up on it, just pushing her start date back to the new year instead. With that settled and Alice's path finally clear, Jacob turns his attention to Abby. He's preparing to propose, and he jokes that as a Goodwin, she'd probably expect the perfect ring, half wishing out loud that he had some kind of family heirloom worthy of her. And in one of the finale's quietest, most generous gestures, Alice offers him her own engagement ring instead, the one originally used by her father Brady to propose to Kat all the way back when this show began. The moment that ring changes hands, the show drops its biggest reveal of the entire series, and it does it almost casually, almost like it trusts us to have already half figured it out. Casey, the time traveler we've been quietly trying to identify since the start of this final season, is Jacob and Abby's child from the future. All those breadcrumbs, all that careful circling, and the show simply lets the pieces click into place rather than stopping to explain itself. I honestly respect that choice more than almost anything else in this finale. And the reason the show chose to center Jacob and Abby's wedding instead of Kat and Elliot's comes straight from executive producer Alexandra Clark in an interview after the finale aired. She explained that this season's flashback timeline showed us a moment when all three founding families, the Landrys, the Goodwins, and the Augustines, through Vic, Tessa, and Evelyn, used to sit around the very same kitchen table as actual friends. Jacob marrying Abby is that circle finally closing generations later. It's not just a romance plot resolving. It's decades of fractured, complicated family history, quietly making peace with itself in real time. Clark also explained the choice behind which lost loved ones each character gets to see at the wedding, asking the writer's room a deceptively simple question. Who are the people our main cast would want to see in that moment, and who's the first person they'd think of? For Dell, it was Colton, but specifically the Colton from the 1990s, the version she'd just gotten the chance to reconnect with and dance with earlier this season. For Kat, it was Fern, because as Clark put it, the two of them built a genuinely beautiful friendship over the course of this final season. I honestly think letting the living dance with the people they've lost, even just for one wedding reception scene, captures everything this show has ever been trying to say about grief, memory, and time in a way no amount of dialogue could. Evelyn also gets real closure with Alice in this episode, finally addressing a long-running grievance connected to that spliced film footage that's been quietly nagging at this season's mystery for weeks. And Max and Alice's mutual feelings finally get confirmed out loud between them, which I think a lot of fans were desperately hoping for. But true to this show's commitment to bittersweet endings over tidy fairy tale ones, Alice still chooses to leave for New York and prioritize herself first, feelings and all. There's also a striking line from Kat directed at Grayson Goodwin in this episode. History is written by the winners, which honestly feels less like a throwaway piece of dialogue and more like the thesis statement of this entire series, dressed up as a single sentence and handed to us on the way out the door. There's also a fun, unresolved little detail that critics have already started picking apart that I want to mention, because I think it's exactly the kind of thing this fandom is going to argue about for months. The show consistently lists the character's name as Casey, but the internship agreement we briefly saw signed earlier in the season was signed KC, leading to speculation that the full name might actually be Catherine Coyle. Nothing about this gets confirmed in the finale. It's just left sitting there. A tiny breadcrumb in a finale otherwise obsessed with answering things. But the scene I think everyone is actually going to be talking about for years is the very last one. Dell and Sam alone together in the stables. Dell tells him she's happy. Genuinely, simply happy. But there's one condition attached to that happiness, and it's the same condition this entire show has been quietly arguing for across 4 seasons. No more secrets between them. Sam, half joking, asks if that means she wants to know everything he knows about the future. And Dell just laughs and reminds him of the first rule of time travel, that this family has learned and relearned and paid for in grief over and over again. You never tell someone their future. After 4 seasons of characters chasing answers across 100 years of pond water, the show ends on the idea that peace was never actually about knowing what's coming next. It's about trusting the person standing in front of you enough to walk into that unknown future with them anyway. Eyes open, no map required. There's a little bit of behind the scenes texture worth sharing too, because I think it tells you something about how much this cast and crew actually loved making this show. In the same interview, co-showrunner Heather Conkey admitted she wished they'd gotten to spend more time in the 1920s specifically, saying the show usually dedicates 2 full seasons to exploring a single era properly, and this one got cut a little short for her taste. Clark added that there are still 2 entire eras of this family's history sitting essentially blank. Colton's father's generation in the 1940s and 50s, and the era Tessa and Griffin originally fell into back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, just after Thomas and Susanna. And in a lighter moment, Clark joked that the writers used to talk on set about taking this show on the road entirely, half seriously floating the idea of a storyline where a Landry pops up at the Trevi Fountain and they just call it The Way Rome. Because, as she put it, a Landry never gives up hope. It's a small joke, but I honestly think it tells you everything about how much affection this creative team has for the world they built, even the parts they never got to fully explore. Hallmark confirmed back in November that this was always meant to be the final season, a planned ending rather than a cancellation forced by declining ratings on linear cable. But it's worth being honest about the bigger picture here too. This show found a significantly larger audience on Netflix, where the first 3 seasons are streaming, than it ever found on Hallmark Channel alone. And that mismatch, a show ending on cable television at the exact moment it was finding new life on a global streaming platform, is exactly why there's already real fan momentum building to get Netflix to pick this story back up in some form. And honestly, looking at everything still left deliberately open here, Tessa's actual whereabouts after her escape, the full extent of who Casey really is by name, entire generations of this family's history, the writers themselves admitted, they wish they'd gotten more time with, a continuation wouldn't feel like a cash grab. It would feel like the show simply getting to keep the promise it's made to us since episode 1, that there's always one more question waiting behind every answer it gives you. 4 seasons. 1 pond. A family that never once stopped finding its way back to each other across 100 years of mistakes, secrets, staged deaths, and second chances they didn't always know they'd been given. I honestly think Ahead by a Century earned every single minute of its extended runtime and earned the ending it chose to give us, even the parts of it that still ache a little on purpose. Drop a comment and tell me, were you Team Kat and Elliot wedding? Or did Jacob and Abby's actually hit you harder once you understood what it represented? And do you think Netflix should bring this show back to finish what's still left open? Because after watching Del remind Sam of the first rule of time travel one last time, I honestly don't think I'm ready to say goodbye to this family either.